Welcome to today's lesson. Today we're going to be touching on the key people during the American Revolution. So to start, let's talk about Samuel Adams. This guy was born in Boston, Massachusetts, so right in the center, the heart of the rebelling colony of Massachusetts. He was educated at Harvard University, very prestigious spot to be. He entered politics after his first business venture collapsed. He served in both the First and Second Continental Congress. The second, of course, was the meeting where they wrote the Declaration of Independence. He was a leading political organizer against the British in the colony, so he was outspoken against the British. And he was a leader of the group, the Sons of Liberty, so that was a group that were protesting against England and was the group responsible for the Boston Tea Party. A little bit more about Adams. It's believed that at the Boston Massacre that he played a role in getting his group, the Sons of Liberty, to try and antagonize or harass the British troops to the point where they eventually opened fire. And he was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. Okay, next up we've got Ben Franklin. He was also born in Boston, Massachusetts. He had to leave his schooling so that he could help his father as a soap maker. He became a printer in Philadelphia, and later he rose up the ranks to becoming an editor for the newspaper, the Pennsylvania Gazette. Very famous author. He's well known for his Poor Richard's Almanac, and one of the most famous parts of that is all of the sayings or American proverbs that he had. So if you've ever heard the expression, "A penny saved is a penny earned," that can be credited back to Ben Franklin in his Poor Richard's Almanac. He was a man of many talents. He was a scientist, a writer, he was a businessman, statesman, publisher, inventor. So I'm sure you can picture hearing the stories about Ben Franklin with his kite out in the lightning storm with a key up on the kite. He invented many things, so right off of that he invented the lightning rod, invented bifocals, he invented the Franklin stove. He was the first to come up with the idea of a public fire department in Philadelphia, a writer, publisher. But I think one of the coolest things that Franklin did is he was responsible for getting the French to help the American colonies during the Revolution. So he used his charm, his charisma, to persuade the French to help us in our efforts against Britain. Okay, next up we've got King George III, King of England. He was afflicted with a genetic disease called porphyria. So that was a disease that was passed down from generation to generation within the English royalty. That was along the same line of George. He became king at age 22, actually when his grandfather, George II, passed away. His dad had died before his grandfather. He was the king while England fought against France in the French and Indian War. Again, that war was basically for dominance in the colonies, especially in the Ohio River Valley in North America. Eventually, England did win the war, but as we know, wars are very expensive. So to try and recoup some of the money lost, or money spent during the Revolution, during the French and Indian War, he decided he was going to tax the colonies to make back some of the money he spent fighting against France. So to control the colonies, especially when they started pushing back and protesting against those taxes, he used military force, which results in the rebellion eventually. He is singled out in the Declaration of Independence as the main cause for the American Revolution. So in the Declaration, after all of the beautiful language at the beginning, talking about all men created equal, talking about the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, after all of that ends, then the Declaration just becomes a long list of the grievances or the complaints that the colonists had against King George and the British. Eventually, he dies in 1820, and when he dies, he's blind, deaf, and partially insane due to his disease porphyria. Okay, next guy we have Thomas Jefferson. He's from Virginia. He was a plantation owner, so a wealthy farmer. He writes many political pamphlets. He served for several terms in the Virginia House of Burgesses. So again, that's the first political, or the first democratic government set up in North America. And eventually he's the nation's third president. He was one of the youngest members to attend the Continental Congresses. In fact, he was only 33 years old during the Second Continental Congress, where he was chosen to write the Declaration of Independence in 1776. And the funny thing is, it wasn't because it was this prestigious honor that all of the other delegates felt. It was more that they thought that the document wouldn't be as big of a deal as it turned out to be. So they kind of gave it to the youngest member, the least seniored member. So he got to write it based more on his youth than based off of his writing skills. Although, as history shows us, he is a very skilled writer as well. And during the actual Revolution, he serves as the governor of Virginia. Okay, next up we've got Thomas Paine. Now, he was an English Quaker who arrived in the colonies just before the war broke out in 1775. And he was a very good persuasive writer, and he put out these persuasive political pamphlets called Common Sense, because he thought it was common sense to criticize the British king. He thought it was common sense for the colonies to rebel, and he thought that it was common sense that they had the right to start a new government. And Common Sense was very influential. It was something that, once printed, people would read from street corners, in taverns, in inns, in churches even. It was something that was read aloud to the masses and had a major influence on people trying to become a patriot and to push for independence. He later also wrote a pamphlet called American Crisis, and that was designed to inspire colonial soldiers to continue to push to fight against the British, even though they had very tough conditions and often were lacking supplies that they needed. Next up we've got John Paul Jones. Now, he was Scottish, born in Scotland. He began serving on trading ships when he was only 13 years old, but he quickly rises up the ranks. By the time he's 21, he commands a ship, and he joins the Continental Navy to fight against the British. He had a great career during the Revolution. A lot of times the Continental Navy was severely lacking, and they were going up against the most powerful navy in the world, so he was taking on forces much larger than what he himself had to his disposal. His big claim to fame, though, is in the middle of one battle where it looked like things were going pretty poorly for him. His ship was taking on cannonballs, taking on fire, and the British commander was wondering if he was going to surrender, and John Paul Jones answered him, "I have not yet begun to fight." And fight he did, and he actually won that battle. He's considered by many to be the founder of our U.S. Navy. Okay, next up we've got a guy named Marquis de Lafayette. And as you can hear from the name, he was French, and he was a French nobleman who joins the American cause. He served right under Commander-in-Chief George Washington, so the commander of the Continental Army, and he served there during the winter at Valley Forge. He was also a key figure, along with Ben Franklin, in helping the French to aid the colonies against their rivals, the British. Which brings us to George Washington. Now, he actually fought for the British during the French and Indian War, so led the British in many battles against the French. He was named the Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army by the Second Continental Congress. So again, the Second Continental Congress, that's the group that wrote the Declaration of Independence. They also appointed Washington in charge of their makeshift, spur-of-the-moment army that they needed to put together. He's considered a very bright, a very good motivational military leader, even though his win-loss record may not reflect it. He actually lost more battles than he won, but that could probably be credited more to his lack of trained soldiers, especially right at the beginning, lack of supplies for them, and lack of weapons and funding. So he led the Continental Army a little later in the war at two major victories at Trenton, New Jersey. So when he snuck up on Christmas Eve, crossing the Delaware to attack the Hessians who were celebrating Christmas, And of course, the battle that won it all, that ended it all, in Yorktown, Virginia. He endured the tough winter at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. So when the conditions were rough, soldiers didn't have food and supplies, but that was also a time that really made the soldiers admire him, that he cared about them, that it really endeared him to his soldiers based on his concern for their well-being during that tough time. And then eventually he became the first U.S. president, even though people wanted to make him a king, but he thought, no, we just got out of having one King George, we don't need another. So he set the example by serving 2 terms. So a very influential guy. Okay, and that's the end. I hope you learned about some of these key players within the American Revolution. Thanks for watching.